I'm afraid we've lost him. 4 simple words that shattered my world as I stood at my husband's hospital bedside, his hand still warm in mine. But what the doctor didn't know, what nobody knew, was that James had been lost to me long before. His heart gave out. The secrets I discovered in the days following his death would transform my grief into something far more dangerous. Purpose. My name is Maya Winters, and for 15 years I'd been the dutiful wife of one of Boston's most celebrated investment bankers. What I didn't know was that the entire time, I'd also been the unwitting partner in his most elaborate scheme. Reading of his will was supposed to be a formality. Instead, it became the first domino in a chain of revelations that would lead me through a labyrinth of offshore accounts, shell companies, and a mistress who was about to discover that her perfect life had been built on quicksand. Quicksand I was about to turn into concrete. "Mrs. Winters," his lawyer said, sliding a folder toward me across the polished mahogany desk. "There's something else your husband wanted you to have." Inside was a key and a handwritten note with an address I'd never seen before. Below it, in James's precise handwriting, "For when you're ready to know everything." What I found there changed everything. Not just about my marriage, but about who I would become. The grieving widow was gone. In her place stood a woman with nothing left to lose and everything to reclaim. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The key led to a storage unit in a discreet facility on the outskirts of Boston. I drove there alone the day after the funeral, my black dress exchanged for jeans and a sweater, my wedding ring still on my finger. It felt strange, driving. Somewhere James had never mentioned, to unlock secrets he'd kept hidden throughout our marriage. The storage facility was nondescript, the kind of place designed to be forgotten. Unit 1542 was at the far end of a dimly lit hallway. My hands trembled slightly as I inserted the key, the lock giving way with a satisfying click that echoed in the silent corridor. What I found inside wasn't what I expected. No hidden treasures or sordid evidence of a double life. At least, not immediately apparent. Instead, the unit contained a single desk with a computer, filing cabinets lining one wall, and a small safe built into the floor. A post-it note on the computer monitor read simply, "Password, Maya Winter 2008. The year D. We met. The computer booted quickly, the password granting me access to a desktop with a single folder labeled Contingency. Inside were hundreds of files, meticulously organized and labeled. Financial records, property deeds, corporate documents, and surveillance photos. So many photos. James with people I'd never seen before. James entering buildings I didn't recognize. James in intimate conversation with a striking woman with copper-colored hair who appeared in dozens of images. I felt oddly detached as I clicked through them, as though I were investigating a stranger's life rather than unraveling the secrets of the man I'd shared a bed with for 15 years. Perhaps some part of me had always known there was more to James than he allowed me to see. The charming, brilliant investment banker who could convince anyone of anything, including me, apparently. The most recent photos were dated just 2 weeks before his heart attack. The woman with copper hair, entering what appeared to be a luxury condo building. James following 20 minutes later. Then, most shocking of all, a photo of the woman's slightly rounded belly, a small but unmistakable pregnancy. My hand froze, on the mouse. The numbness that had protected me since his death began to crack, revealing something molten underneath. A text file named For Maya sat at the bottom of the folder. I clicked it open. Maya, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and you've found what I hoped you never would. I know that's selfish. I've always been selfish, even when I convinced myself otherwise. Everything you'll find here is true. The companies, the accounts, the transactions, they're all real. I built an empire in the shadows while letting you. Believe we were simply comfortable. I kept you separate from it because what started as ambition became something darker, something I couldn't control. Vanessa Drake knows parts of it, but not everything. She believes she'll inherit what I promised her. She's carrying what she believes is the heir to everything I built. She's wrong on both counts. You were never just my wife, Maya. In the eyes of the law, you're the majority owner of Winter Consortium, the parent company that controls everything. I put it all in your name to protect it from my creditors and enemies, using loopholes and shell corporations. Only Benedict knows the full extent of it. That's why I made him your attorney, not just mine. I didn't deserve you. I know that now, too late. But I'm giving you the truth and the power to decide what happens next. I'm sorry for everything. James. I read it twice more, the words blurring as tears filled my eyes. Not tears of grief, but of pure, undiluted rage. 15 years of my life built on lies. A husband who had used me as a shield for his financial schemes while building a second life with another woman. And a child. James had never wanted children with me. The timing isn't right. He'd always said, "We have time." Until we didn't. The safe in the floor required another code. I tried our anniversary. Nothing. His birthday. Nothing. Then, acting on instinct, I tried the numbers from the storage unit. 1542. The lock disengaged with a soft hiss. Inside was a leather portfolio containing what appeared to be the complete ownership structure of Winter Consortium, with my signature on documents I had no memory of signing. Corporate registrations listing me as majority shareholder, offshore accounts with balances that made me dizzy, properties in 5 countries, and another file labeled Vanessa Drake. I hesitated before opening it, some part of me still clinging to the possibility that this was all an elaborate mistake, that the woman in the photos wasn't pregnant with my husband's child, that James hadn't been living a double life while I renovated our home and hosted dinner parties for his colleagues. The file contained everything. Vanessa's background, her 5-year relationship with James, the condo he had purchased for her in Beacon Hill, the position he had created for her at one of his subsidiary companies, monthly deposits into her personal accounts, medical records confirming her pregnancy, 16 weeks along when James died. And most damning of all, a copy of a revised will James had apparently been preparing, one that would have acknowledged his unborn child and provided a substantial trust fund, funded by assets that, ironically, were legally mine. A will that was never finalized or signed because a massive heart attack had struck him down in our kitchen as I called frantically for an ambulance. I closed the file and leaned back in the chair, staring at the ceiling of the storage unit. The shock was wearing off, replaced by something unfamiliar, a cold, calculating clarity. James had betrayed me in every way possible. But in his twisted attempt to hide his assets, he had inadvertently given me something precious. Power. According to these documents, I owned controlling interest in a corporate empire I hadn't known existed until today. An empire that included the very company where Vanessa Drake worked, the building where she lived, and the accounts that funded her lifestyle. My phone rang, startling me in the silence. It was Benedict Harlow, James's attorney. My attorney now, I supposed. "Maya, I've been trying to reach you," he said, his voice tense. "There's something we need to discuss immediately." "Let me guess," I replied, surprised by the steadiness of my own voice. "Vanessa Drake wants a meeting." The silence on the other end confirmed it. "Tell her I'll meet with her," I said, making a decision in that moment that would set everything in motion. 1 week from today, at James's office. "Maya, are you sure that's wise? Perhaps we should—" 1 week, I repeated firmly. "I need time to prepare." I hung up before he could argue, turning back to the computer. I had documents to read, companies to understand, and a reckoning to plan. James had left me with the pieces of his secret life scattered before me like a puzzle. Now I would put them together, not to preserve his legacy, but to reclaim what was rightfully mine. And as for Vanessa Drake and her unborn child, they would learn what I was just discovering myself, that I was not the naive, decorative wife James had taken me for. I was something far more dangerous. I was the woman who owned everything. For the next week, I barely slept. The storage unit became my second home as I immersed myself in James's secret world, assisted by Benedict, who seemed both impressed and concerned by my determination to understand every aspect of the Winter Consortium. "You don't have to do this yourself," he said on the third day, watching me pore over financial statements from a Singapore-based holding company. "We can hire a team of forensic accountants." "And risk information leaking?" I shook my head. "No, I need to understand this myself before anyone else gets involved." What emerged from my investigation was both impressive and disturbing. James had built a complex network of companies, each one feeding into the next, ultimately controlled by Winter Consortium, the company legally owned by me. On paper, I was one of the wealthiest women in Boston, controlling assets worth over $300 million. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. In reality, I had been living in a beautiful cage, given an allowance from my own money, while James used the rest to fund his alternate life and questionable business practices. Some of his dealings appeared perfectly legitimate: property developments, technology investments, financial services. Others operated in murkier territory, with transactions that Benedict reluctantly confirmed were creative accounting. "Was it money laundering?" I asked him directly on the fifth day. Benedict carefully removed his glasses, cleaning them with a monogrammed handkerchief, a move I recognized as his stalling tactic when confronted with uncomfortable questions. "Not exactly," he said finally. "James operated in gray areas, tax avoidance rather than tax evasion, regulatory arbitrage rather than regulation violation. But he made enemies, powerful ones. And he used me as a shield," I concluded, "put everything in my name to protect it." "He said he was protecting you," Benedict corrected gently. I laughed, the sound brittle in the quiet room. "By keeping me ignorant and financially dependent while he built a life with another woman? That's not protection, Benedict. That's control." He didn't argue. The most illuminating discovery came on the sixth day, when I found a folder containing communications between James and Vanessa. Their relationship hadn't been the simple affair I'd initially imagined. Vanessa was a former SEC investigator who had been looking into one of James's subsidiaries 5 years ago. Instead of finding evidence of wrongdoing, she'd found James, charming, persuasive James, who had convinced her to leave government work for a much more lucrative position in his organization. Their affair had begun shortly after, though the communications suggested something more complex than romance. Vanessa had ambitions of her own, and James had promised her a pathway to achieving them, as his partner in business and life, once he'd resolved his current situation. I was the situation to be resolved. The pregnancy appeared to have accelerated their timeline. Messages from the months before James's death showed them discussing his divorce, how to minimize my settlement, and the transition of control to their new family unit once their child was born. I felt strangely calm as I read through their plans for my financial dismantling. The betrayal was so complete that it had transcended pain, leaving only cold determination in its wake. On the morning I was to meet Vanessa, I did something I hadn't done since James's death. I dressed carefully, applying makeup with precision, selecting a sleek black pantsuit that I'd worn to charity galas when playing the role of successful banker's wife. The woman in the mirror looked familiar yet different, harder around the eyes perhaps, with a set to her jaw that hadn't been there before. Benedict met me in the lobby of the downtown office building that housed the main branch of Winter Financial, the public-facing arm of James's empire. "You don't have to do this," he said for perhaps the 10th time. "I can handle Ms. Drake myself." "No," I replied simply. "She needs to see me, and I need to see her." We rode the elevator to the top floor in silence. James's corner office, technically my office now, had been left untouched since his death. His presence lingered in every carefully chosen piece of furniture, every award mounted on the wall. "She's waiting in the conference room," Benedict said, checking his watch, "along with her attorney, Philip Weston." I nodded, taking a deep breath. Let's not keep them waiting. The conference room was all glass and steel, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of Boston Harbor. Vanessa Drake stood. As we entered, her copper hair gleaming in the morning sunlight, her pregnancy now unmistakable in a form-fitting navy dress that looked expensive. She was younger than me, early 30s to my 42, and strikingly beautiful, with the kind of confident poise that came from knowing it. The kind of woman James would have been drawn to, I thought with detached interest. My opposite in many ways. "Mrs. Winters," she said, extending her hand. "Thank you for agreeing to meet. I'm sorry for your loss." The audacity of her condolence almost made me laugh. Instead, I shook her hand briefly and took my seat at the head of the table, a position that James would have occupied. "Ms. Drake," I acknowledged, turning to the thin, nervous-looking man beside her. "And Mr. Weston, I presume." Benedict sat to my right, placing a single folder before me. We had agreed on a strategy. Let them speak first. Understand what they believed they were entitled to before revealing anything. Weston cleared his throat. "Mrs. Winters, we've requested this meeting to discuss certain provisions that Mr. Winters had intended to make for Ms. Drake and her unborn child. As you may or may not be aware, Mr. Winters and Ms. Drake were in a committed relationship, and the child she's carrying is his." I kept my expression neutral, studying Vanessa's face. She held my gaze steadily, one hand resting protectively on her belly. "And what provisions would those be?" I asked, my voice cooler than I'd intended. Weston slid several documents across the table. Mr. Winters had been in the process of establishing a trust for the child, as well as making arrangements for Ms. Drake's financial security. Unfortunately, these were not finalized before his untimely passing. "I see," I said, not touching the papers. "And what exactly are you hoping to accomplish today?" Vanessa spoke up, her voice surprisingly gentle. "Maya. May I call you Maya? I know this is difficult. I never wanted you to find out this way. James and I—" She hesitated, seemingly searching for the right words. "We had an understanding. He wanted to provide for his child, and for me. That's all I'm asking for. What he would have wanted." The sincerity in her voice was convincing. If I hadn't spent the past week reading her messages with James, I might have believed her. The regretful mistress, only seeking what was promised for her innocent child. "An understanding," I repeated. "And what did this understanding entail exactly?" Weston jumped in, apparently eager to move to specifics. Mr. Winters had discussed a trust of $5 million for the child and a separate settlement of $3 million for Ms. Drake. Additionally, he had promised her continued employment at Apex Strategies as executive director and the deed to the Beacon Hill property where she currently resides. I nodded, taking in these demands while mentally comparing them to what I'd discovered. They were asking for less than James had actually promised her, either out of strategic restraint or because Vanessa didn't know the full extent of what he had intended. "And what makes you think any of this is legally enforceable?" I asked, keeping my tone curious rather than confrontational. Weston shifted uncomfortably. While the documents weren't finalized, we have substantial evidence of Mr. Winters's intentions, including emails, text messages, and witnesses who can attest to his promises. I'm sure you do, I said, finally opening my folder and withdrawing. A single sheet of paper. However, there's something you should understand before we proceed. I slid the paper across to them. A corporate ownership structure showing Winter Consortium at the top, with my name listed as 87% owner. James didn't own Apex Strategies, the Beacon Hill property, or much of anything else, I continued as they examined the document with growing confusion. I do. Vanessa looked up sharply, her composed expression faltering for the first time. That's not possible. James was the founder of Winter Financial. Everyone knows that. Winter Financial is a subsidiary of Winter Consortium, I explained calmly. A privately held company that, according to all legal documentation, has been majority owned by me since its inception 12 years ago. Weston was frantically flipping through his own documents. This can't be right. Mr. Winters controlled all his business interests. He managed them, Benedict interjected smoothly, with Mrs. Winters' authorization, but ownership has always been primarily with her, a fact that can be verified through corporate registries and banking records. The revelation hung in the air between us. I watched Vanessa's face as she processed this information, seeing the calculation behind her eyes. She was intelligent, had to be, as a former SEC investigator. She would be putting the pieces together, realizing the implications. Even if that's true, she said finally, her voice steady despite her evident shock, it doesn't change the fact that James intended to provide for his child. Surely you wouldn't deny your husband's baby financial security out of spite. The word hung between us, a challenge. I studied her for a long moment before responding. Tell me, Vanessa, in all your intimate conversations with James, did he ever mention what happened to our baby? Her brow furrowed. You didn't have children. Not for lack of trying, I said, surprising myself with how steady my voice remained. I was pregnant once, 8 years ago, second trimester. James was in Singapore when I started bleeding. By the time he got back, I'd lost the baby and nearly died from complications. I could see from her expression that James had never shared this with her. He told me afterward that maybe it was for the best, I continued, the memory still sharp, despite the years. That children would complicate our lives. Every time I brought up trying again or adoption, he had a reason why the timing wasn't right. Vanessa's hand tightened over her belly, a gesture that didn't escape my notice. I'm sorry for your loss, she said, and I was surprised to hear what seemed like genuine sympathy in her voice. But that doesn't change the fact that this child exists. This child is James's legacy, whether you— Legacy, I interrupted, the word bitter on my tongue. Is that what you believe this is about? Carrying on the Winters name? I withdrew another document from my folder, the results of the investigation I'd had Benedict commission the day after discovering James's secret life. Did you know that James legally changed his name before we met? I asked, watching her closely. He was born Richard James Caldwell, son of a convicted financial fraudster who died in prison. He buried that identity and reinvented himself as James Winters, the self-made financial genius. Vanessa's shock confirmed that this, too, had been kept from her. The master of secrets, my husband, controlling what each woman in his life knew about him. So you see, I continued, gentler now, there is no great Winters legacy to preserve, only a carefully constructed fiction. Weston, recovering from his initial shock, attempted to redirect the conversation. Regardless of these revelations, the fact remains that Mr. Winters made certain promises that Ms. Drake and her child are entitled to. Legally entitled? To? Benedict questioned. Based on what? unfinalized documents and verbal promises from a man who, as we're discovering, misrepresented many things. I raised a hand, silencing both attorneys. I have a proposal. All eyes turned to me. I will establish a trust for the child, $2 million, released in stages through adulthood. Reasonable and generous, given the circumstances. Vanessa's posture stiffened at the reduced amount, but I continued before she could object. As for your position at Apex Strategies, Ms. Drake, that's a different matter. I'll need to review your qualifications and performance more thoroughly before making any decisions about your professional future with my company. Your company, she repeated, a hint of bitterness creeping into her voice. Yes, I confirmed simply. And regarding the Beacon Hill property, you're welcome to continue residing there for the duration of your pregnancy, rent-free. Afterward, we can discuss a fair market sale if you're interested in purchasing it. Weston immediately began to protest the terms as inadequate, but Vanessa silenced him with a gesture, her eyes never leaving mine. You've known all along, haven't you? She asked quietly. About me. About us. No, I admitted. James kept his secrets well. I only discovered everything after his death. A look passed between us then, a moment of unexpected understanding between two women who had loved and been deceived by the same man. I'll consider your offer, she said finally, rising from her chair with as much dignity as her pregnancy allowed. My attorney will be in touch. As she reached the door, she turned back to me. He wasn't the man either of us thought he was he? I met her gaze steadily. No, he wasn't. After they departed, Benedict sat back, loosening his tie with a low whistle. That was not how I expected this meeting to go. No? I gathered my documents, feeling strangely hollow now that the confrontation was over. I thought there would be more drama, he admitted. Accusations, tears. She seemed almost resigned. She's smart, I replied. She recognizes when she's been outmaneuvered. James played us both, but she's the one left truly vulnerable. She's pregnant, without the future she was promised. And you're just going to help her, after what she did? I considered the question as I stared out at the harbor, watching the boats cutting through the blue water below. She didn't know I existed as anything more than an inconvenient wife, I said finally. James was the one who made vows to me, not her, and that child. I paused, thinking of the baby I'd lost, the family I'd never had. That child is innocent. Benedict looked at me with something like admiration. You're a better person than most would be in your situation. I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Don't mistake practicality for nobility, Benedict. I'm giving Vanessa and her child enough to live comfortably, but not enough to ever challenge me. And tomorrow. Tomorrow? He prompted when I didn't continue. Tomorrow, I start learning how to run my company. The news that Maya Winters had taken control of Winter Consortium sent ripples through Boston's financial community. For years, I had been viewed as simply the elegant wife of James Winters, present at galas and charity functions, but otherwise invisible in the business world. Now, suddenly, I was revealed as the majority owner of one of the city's most significant private financial empires. The reactions were predictable: confusion, skepticism, thinly veiled sexism masked as concern. Questions about my qualifications, my intentions, my emotional state so soon after my husband's death. After the third condescending interview with a former colleague of James's, I stopped taking meetings and focused instead on education. I hired the best financial advisors, corporate attorneys, and forensic accountants, made them sign ironclad confidentiality agreements, and tasked them with teaching me everything I needed to know about my business empire. I was a quick study, with an analytical mind that surprised even the most skeptical of my new mentors. "You have a natural aptitude for this," admitted Elaine Chen, the stern financial analyst who had initially questioned my ability to understand complex investment strategies. "If you'd been allowed into the business years ago, you might have saved your husband from some of his riskier decisions." Allowed. The word stung, though Elaine hadn't meant it as a criticism of me. It was simply the truth. James had deliberately kept me ignorant of his business dealings, presenting it as protection while using me as a legal shield for his activities. 3 months after James's death, I was working 16-hour days, sleeping, in the guest room of our Beacon Hill home because the master bedroom still held too many memories. I was existing on coffee and determination, learning the intricacies of international finance, corporate governance, and the specific industries in which Winter Consortium held interests. I was also discovering just how precarious some aspects of the business were. James had made enemies, powerful people who believed he had cheated them, regulators who had been watching certain subsidiaries for years, former partners who had been pushed out when they became inconvenient. "Mrs. Winters?" My assistant, Emma, newly hired and fiercely efficient, appeared at my office door. "Ms. Drake is here to see you." I glanced at the clock. Nearly 8 in the evening, well past regular business hours. "Did she have an appointment?" "No, ma'am. She says it's urgent." I hesitated, then nodded. "Send her in." Vanessa entered, now noticeably more pregnant than when I'd last seen her 3 months ago. She wore a simple black maternity dress, her copper hair pulled back in a sleek ponytail, her face free of makeup. She looked tired, I noticed. The kind of bone-deep exhaustion I recognized from my own mirror. "Maya," she said, forgoing formality. "Thank you for seeing me. I apologize for coming unannounced." "Please, sit," I offered, gesturing to the chair, across from my desk. "Can I offer you water? Tea?" "Water would be nice, thank you." I asked Emma to bring us both water, then turned back to my unexpected visitor. "What's so urgent, Vanessa?" She placed a file on my desk. "I found these while going through some papers James had stored at my apartment. I think you should see them." I opened the file cautiously, scanning the contents: bank statements, correspondence with offshore entities, and what appeared to be blackmail material on several prominent Boston businessmen. "Where did you get these?" I asked, my voice sharper than I'd intended. "James kept a small safe behind a false panel in my guest room closet. I only discovered it last week when I was preparing the room for—" She gestured to her belly. "For the baby." I continued examining the documents, their implications becoming clearer with each page. These weren't just records of James's questionable business practices. They were evidence that could potentially implicate me as the legal owner of the companies involved. "Why are you showing me these?" I asked, studying her face for clues to her motivation. Vanessa met my gaze directly. "Because you're not the only one who's been trying to understand what James was really doing. I've been conducting my own investigation since his death." "Your SEC background," I murmured. She nodded. "I left government work, but I still have the training. And what I've found?" She hesitated. "Maya, some of James's business associates believe you're continuing his operations exactly as he left them. They think you're fully aware of, and complicit in, everything that was happening." "And what exactly was happening?" I asked, though I had begun to form my own suspicions over the past months. "Money laundering for certain clients, market manipulation, strategic corporate espionage." She listed each offense matter-of-factly. "And more recently, negotiations with individuals connected to organized crime in Eastern Europe." The room seemed suddenly colder. I had discovered concerning patterns in the business, but nothing as explicitly criminal as what Vanessa was suggesting. If she was telling the truth, and the documents before me suggested she was. The situation was far more dangerous than I had realized. Again, why tell me this? Why not take it to the authorities? Because I'm carrying James's child, she said simply. If he was involved in criminal activity and I report it, that legacy follows this baby forever. And frankly, she hesitated, because despite everything, I don't believe you were knowingly involved. You were used, just as I was. A silence fell between us as I processed her words. Two women, manipulated in different ways by the same man, now left to deal with the consequences of his actions. There's something else, Vanessa continued, her voice lower. I've been receiving warnings. Subtle at first. Unusual cars parked outside my building, the sense of being followed. Last week, someone broke into my apartment while I was out. Nothing was taken, but it was clear someone had been through my things. I thought of the enemies James had made, the powerful people who might believe I was continuing his operations. If they thought Vanessa had information or access to James's records. Have you told anyone else about what you found? She shook her head. Only you. I may not have the best track record with honesty, given our situation, but I'm not stupid. These are dangerous people. I closed the file, making a decision. You shouldn't go back to the Beacon Hill apartment. Not tonight. Possibly not at all. What? She looked startled. Where would I go? I have a property in Brookline. Secure. Building doorman, not connected to James's public profile or business dealings. I reached for my phone. I can have a car take you there tonight, and we can arrange to move your essential belongings tomorrow. You would do that? For me? The disbelief in her voice was understandable. Not just for you, I said, glancing at her pregnant belly. If what you've shown me is accurate, we're both potentially in danger. And while I'm still processing my feelings about your relationship with James, I'm not going to leave a pregnant woman vulnerable to people who might wish her harm. Vanessa stared at me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. I understand that this doesn't make us friends. No, I agreed. But it might make us allies. And right now, we both could use those. After arranging for Vanessa's transportation and temporary housing, I called Benedict, asking him to meet me at the office despite the late hour. While waiting for him, I began systematically going through the documents Vanessa had provided, organizing them by entity and level of potential. Risk. By the time Benedict arrived, looking rumpled and concerned, I had formed the outline of a plan. We need to clean house, I told him without preamble. Completely divorce ourselves from any entity or individual connected to these activities. I gestured to the neatly organized piles of incriminating documents. Benedict reviewed them quickly, his expression growing more grave with each page. This goes beyond creative accounting or tax avoidance, Maya. If these records are accurate— They are, I interrupted. Vanessa's former SEC experience makes her an excellent judge of financial impropriety, and she has no reason to fabricate this. Then we're talking about potential criminal exposure, he said bluntly. For the companies, possibly for you personally as the legal owner, even if you were unaware. I know. I stood, pacing the length of my office. That's why we need to move quickly and decisively. I want a complete audit of every subsidiary, every holding, every transaction. Any entity connected to these activities needs to be isolated and either cleaned up or shut down. That could mean significant financial losses, he warned. Some of these operations appear to be quite profitable. I don't care, I said firmly. I won't build my future on James's corruption. Whatever is left after we clean house will be enough. Benedict studied me for a moment, then nodded. It won't be easy. Some of these connections run deep, and these people won't appreciate being cut off. I'm not asking for easy, I replied. I'm asking for right and necessary. "What about Vanessa and her information?" he asked. "If she decides to go to the authorities—" "She won't," I said, with more confidence than I felt. "At least not immediately. She's concerned about how it would affect her child's future, and she's scared. Apparently, she's been receiving threats." Benedict frowned. "That's concerning. If James's associates believe she has incriminating information—" "I've moved her to the Brookline property for now," I informed him. "It's secure and unlisted." He raised an eyebrow but didn't comment on my decision to protect the woman who had been my husband's mistress. Instead, he focused on the practical aspects of our situation. "We'll need a specialized team for this kind of cleanup operation. People we can trust absolutely, with expertise in international finance, corporate law, and possibly even security." "Whatever it takes," I agreed. "But we start now." That night marked the beginning of a new phase in my transformation. No longer was I simply learning to run the legitimate aspects of James's business empire. Now I was actively working to purge it of corruption, to remake it into something I could be proud of. It was also the beginning of an unexpected alliance with Vanessa Drake, a woman I had every reason to hate but found myself reluctantly respecting. Her analytical skills and insider knowledge of certain aspects of James's operations proved invaluable as we worked to identify and isolate the problematic elements of the business. For 2 months, we operated in what felt like a state of siege. Vanessa remained in the Brookline property, working remotely and communicating with me through secure channels. I hired a private security firm to protect us both, their presence a constant reminder of the potential danger. The cleanup process was painful and expensive. Several profitable subsidiaries had to be shut down entirely when we discovered their business models were built around facilitating money movement for questionable clients. Others required complete restructuring, with new management and rigorous compliance protocols. Each move we made sent ripples through Boston's financial community. Former associates of James attempted to contact me, some with thinly veiled threats, disguised as concern, others with offers to help manage the transition in ways that would have maintained the corrupt status quo. I declined every offer, every meeting. The only people I trusted now were those I had personally vetted and hired, and, surprisingly, Vanessa. "They're getting nervous," she told me one evening as we reviewed financial reports in the secure conference room I'd established for our work, especially Viktor Petrov and his associates. Petrov was a name that had appeared repeatedly in our investigation, a Russian businessman with connections to both legitimate enterprises and shadowy criminal organizations. James had apparently facilitated several major investments for him through offshore structures designed to obscure the money's origins. "We've closed 3 subsidiaries that handled his accounts," I noted, "and frozen the assets in 2 others pending compliance review." Vanessa absently rubbed her growing belly, a habit she'd developed in recent weeks. At 7 months pregnant, she looked exhausted, the stress of our situation compounding the physical demands of her pregnancy. "Petrov isn't someone who accepts losses gracefully," she warned, "and he believes you're continuing James's operations with new terms, not shutting them down." "How do you know what he believes?" She hesitated. "I have contacts from my SEC days, people who keep tabs on individuals like Petrov. He's been asking questions about you." A chill ran through me. "What kind of questions?" "The kind that suggest he's trying to understand whether you're a threat or a potential ally. So far, he's giving you the benefit of the doubt, assuming you're just asserting your position before continuing business as usual." "And when he realizes that's not happening?" Vanessa met my gaze directly. "Then we should both be very careful." As if to validate her warning, the next morning brought news that one of the subsidiaries we'd closed had experienced a mysterious fire overnight, destroying its physical offices and some of its records. Though thankfully, we had already secured digital copies of everything important. "Coincidence?" Benedict asked when I called him with the news. I don't believe in coincidences anymore, I replied. Increase security at all our primary locations, and check on the Brookline property. Make sure the security there is airtight. 2 days later, I received a hand-delivered envelope containing a single black and white photograph. Me, entering my office building, clearly taken the previous day. No note, no threat, just the knowledge that I was being watched. I showed it to Benedict, who immediately wanted to involve law enforcement. And tell them what? I countered. That someone took my picture in public? That we suspect, but can't. Prove that a former business associate is unhappy with our corporate restructuring? Maya, this is clearly an intimidation tactic. I know, and responding with panic is exactly what they want. I place the photograph in my desk drawer. We continue as planned, but we accelerate the timetable. That evening, I visited Vanessa at the Brookline property, bringing her a secure laptop with the latest findings from our audit team. She opened the door looking pale and tired, one hand supporting her lower back. You should be resting, I said, noticing how she winced as she moved back to allow me entry. Hard to rest when you're carrying a bowling ball that kicks your ribs, she replied with a wry smile. And harder still when you're waiting for Russian criminals to figure out you're helping dismantle their favorite money laundering operation. Despite everything, I found myself smiling at her dark humor. In another life, under different circumstances, we might have been friends, both strong-willed, analytical women with little patience for nonsense. I've accelerated our timetable, I told her, setting up the laptop on the dining table that had become her makeshift office. We're closing or selling the remaining compromised entities within the next 2 weeks. She raised an eyebrow. That's aggressive. What prompted this? I showed her the photograph I'd received. She studied it, her expression hardening. They're escalating, she observed quietly. Have there been other signs? A fire at one of the closed subsidiaries. Probably to destroy evidence, though we already had everything important. Vanessa handed the photograph back to me. Maya, when this is over, when we've cut all ties to Petrov and his ilk, you need to understand something. They won't simply accept it and move on. People like that don't lose gracefully. What are you suggesting? That I maintain criminal operations out of fear? No, she said firmly. I'm suggesting you prepare for retaliation, professional, personal, possibly both. I thought of James, who had built this precarious house of cards, then left me to deal with its collapse. Had he known how dangerous some of his associates were? Had he cared? I'm already taking security precautions, I assured her. It may not be enough. She hesitated, then continued. When I was with the SEC, I saw what happened to people who crossed certain lines, then tried to walk away. It rarely ended well. What would you have me do, Vanessa? Continue James's operation? Become what he was? Of course not, she replied sharply. But there are ways to protect yourself beyond conventional security. Information, for instance. Leverage. I studied her, understanding dawning. You're suggesting blackmail. I'm suggesting insurance, she corrected. James collected information on everyone he dealt with. That's how he protected himself. Those files I showed you? There's more where those came from. Much more. The idea was both repellent and compelling. I had spent months trying to clean up James's mess, to transform his corrupt empire into something legitimate. Using his methods, even defensively, felt like a step backward. I need to think about this, I said finally. As I prepared to leave, Vanessa suddenly gasped, her hand flying to her belly. Are you all right? I asked, alarmed. Yes, just... She winced again. Braxton Hicks contractions. They've been happening more frequently lately. Should you see a doctor? Already did. Everything's normal, just uncomfortable. She managed a tight smile. Another 6 weeks of this to go. I found myself wondering, not for the first time, what kind of father James would have been to this child. Would he have been present, involved, or would he have been as compartmentalized in parenthood as he was in every other aspect of his life? "Take care of yourself," I said awkwardly, not quite sure how to express the concern I genuinely felt. "Let me know if you need anything." As I left the Brookline property, a silver sedan pulled away from the curb across the street. It could have been nothing, a neighbor, a food delivery. But my newly developed instincts for danger made me note the license plate anyway, sending it to my security team for investigation. The next week passed in a blur of activity as we rapidly closed or sold the remaining compromised entities. Each severed connection felt like cutting away a tumor, painful but necessary for survival. By the time we were finished, Winter Consortium was approximately 40% smaller in terms of asset value, but it was clean, legitimate, and mine in more than just legal documentation. I had made my decision regarding Vanessa's suggestion about insurance, too. While I couldn't bring myself to use blackmail proactively, I had instructed Benedict to secure and encrypt all the information James had collected on his associates, storing it with instructions that it would be released to authorities if anything happened to me or Vanessa. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it offered some protection. People like Petrov might still be dangerous, but they were also calculating. The risk of exposure would make them think twice about direct action against us. Or so I hoped. The confrontation, when it came, was both more direct and more unexpected than I had anticipated. I was working late in my office, reviewing proposals for a new healthcare investment fund, one of the legitimate growth opportunities we had identified during our restructuring. Emma had left hours ago, and the executive floor was quiet save for the occasional sounds of the cleaning staff in distant corridors. "Mrs. Winters." The voice startled me, and I looked up to find a man standing in my doorway, tall, lean, with silver-streaked dark hair, and the kind of expensive suit that somehow managed to be both understated and unmistakably costly. "Viktor Petrov," I said, recognizing him from photographs in our files. "You're in my office without an appointment, or an invitation." He smiled, the expression not reaching his cold blue eyes. "Your security is good, but not that good. May I—" He gestured to the chair across from my desk. I considered calling for help, but my security team was stationed at the building entrances, not on this floor. By the time they arrived, whatever this confrontation was meant to be would already have played out. "Please," I said, deciding to face this directly. "Since you've gone to such trouble to arrange this meeting." Petrov sat with the easy confidence of a man accustomed to intimidating others. "You have been very busy, Mrs. Winters, dismantling in 2 months what your husband built over a decade." "I've been cleaning house," I corrected. "There's a difference." "Semantics," he dismissed, with a wave of his hand. "The result is the same. Certain arrangements that were mutually beneficial have been terminated. Certain investments have been frozen. It has created complications. Criminal enterprises often do face complications when their money laundering options disappear," I replied, meeting his gaze steadily. "That's rather the point." His smile tightened fractionally, the only indication that my directness had unsettled him. "You are very different from your husband. He understood the value of discretion." "And you misunderstand the situation, Mr. Petrov. I'm not James. I'm not negotiating terms for continuing your arrangements. I'm informing you that they're over." He leaned forward slightly, his posture subtly more threatening. "Perhaps you do not fully appreciate the position you are in. Your husband accumulated many obligations, commitments that do not simply disappear because he did. Any legitimate obligations have been or will be honored," I said firmly. "Anything else died with James." Petrov studied me for a long moment, clearly reassessing his approach. "You have acquired James's information archives," he said finally. including materials relating to many of his associates. This gives you a certain leverage. So he knew about the files. Interesting, but not entirely surprising. James's network had many interconnections, and information traveled. I've secured information pertinent to Winter Consortium's operations, I confirmed carefully, as any responsible executive would during a transition. And if something unfortunate were to happen to you, what becomes of this information? The threat was barely veiled now, but I had prepared for this. It goes public. All of it. Every transaction, every shell company, every connection between seemingly legitimate businessmen and the criminal organizations they secretly represent. He didn't react visibly, but I sensed a shift in the energy between us. A recalculation. Mutually assured destruction, Mrs. Winters. I would not have expected such ruthlessness from you. Then you've underestimated me, I replied. As did James, as have many people. Petrov sat back, regarding me with what appeared to be genuine curiosity. You could have continued your husband's operations, maintained his agreements, enjoyed the considerable profits. Instead, you chose this difficult, dangerous path. Why? The question seemed sincere, which was perhaps the most unsettling thing about this entire encounter. This man, this criminal, truly couldn't understand why someone would choose legitimacy over profitable corruption. Because I want to build something real, I said simply. Something that doesn't require looking over my shoulder or wondering when the facade will collapse. Something I can be proud of. He laughed, the sound unexpectedly warm. Ah, pride. A luxury in our world, Mrs. Winters. Not in mine, I countered. Not anymore. Petrov rose, adjusting his immaculate suit. Very well. You have made your position clear, as have I. We find ourselves at an impasse, you with your information, me with my resources. Perhaps it is best if we maintain a respectful distance from each other. I would prefer that, I agreed cautiously. He moved toward the door, then paused. One last thing, Mrs. Winters. Your husband's mistress, Ms. Drake. She has been quite helpful to you in this house cleaning. My blood ran cold. The fact that he knew about Vanessa's role confirmed my fears about how closely we had been watched. Ms. Drake's situation is not your concern, I said, keeping my voice level. Of course. His smile was cold again. I merely find it interesting. The wife protecting the mistress. Americans are so unpredictable. After he left, I immediately called the security team, confirming that they had no record of Petrov entering the building, a concerning failure in our protocols. Then I called Vanessa, relieved when she answered immediately. We need to move you, I said without preamble. Tonight. What's happened? She asked, instantly alert. Petrov paid me a visit. He knows you've been helping me, knows your location. There was a brief silence. I'll start packing. No, just grab essentials. Leave everything else. A security team. We'll be there in 20 minutes to bring you to a new location. This time, I didn't use any property connected to Winter Consortium. Instead, I had Benedict arrange for a secure apartment in Cambridge, owned through multiple layers of shell. Companies, ironically using the very structures James had created for less legitimate purposes. The next morning, I met with Benedict and our security team to revise our protective measures. Petrov made his point, I told them. He can reach us if he wants to. The question is whether he will. I'm betting the information we have is enough to keep him at bay, at least for now. And long-term? Benedict asked. Long-term, we need to be completely disconnected from anything that would interest him or his associates. We're already well on our way to that goal. 2 weeks later, with no further incidents, I allowed myself to believe we might have reached a détente with Petrov. Winter Consortium was now operating fully above board, focusing on legitimate investments in healthcare, sustainable energy, and technology. Our profits were lower but stable, and I was sleeping better at night. I visited Vanessa regularly in her new location, bringing work and updates on our situation. Despite the circumstances of our connection, I had come to value her analytical, mind and direct manner. At 8 months pregnant, she was uncomfortable but resilient, continuing to help with the final stages of our corporate restructuring. "I've been thinking about the future," she said during one of my visits. "After the baby comes." I nodded, waiting for her to continue. "I can't stay in Boston," she said simply. "There are too many connections, too many risks, and I want my child to have a normal life, not one shadowed by James's mistakes." "Where will you go?" I asked, surprised by the pang of something like regret I felt at the thought of her leaving. "West Coast, probably. I have some contacts in Seattle's financial industry. I could start over there, use my SEC background to find legitimate work." I considered this. "Would you be interested in continuing to work for Winter Consortium? Remotely, of course. We could establish a Seattle office, focusing on tech investments. Your skills would be valuable." She looked surprised. "You'd want that? After everything?" "Strange as it seems, I trust you," I admitted. "You've proven yourself in the most difficult circumstances imaginable. That's rare." Vanessa was quiet for a moment. "I'll think about it," she said finally. "Thank you for the offer." 2 days later, I received an urgent call from Vanessa's security detail. She had gone into labor prematurely at just over 35 weeks and had been transported to Massachusetts General Hospital. By the time I arrived, she had already been in labor for 4 hours. The security team had established a perimeter, checking hospital staff IDs and monitoring access to the maternity floor. I was escorted directly to her room. Vanessa looked exhausted, her face pale with pain as she worked through a contraction. "You didn't need to come," she managed when the contraction eased. "Of course I did," I replied, surprising myself with how much I meant it. "Is everything all right with the baby?" "They say yes, just eager to arrive. Small but developed enough that they're not concerned." I stayed with her through the remainder of her labor, an unexpected role I never could have imagined myself in a year ago. When James's daughter was born shortly after midnight, a tiny, perfect creature with a dusting of copper hair like her mother's, I found myself moved in ways I hadn't anticipated. "Lily," Vanessa whispered, holding her newborn daughter. Her name is Lily. I watched them together, this new life untouched by all the complications and darkness that had preceded her arrival. Lily would never know her father, never understand the complex circumstances of her birth. Perhaps that was a mercy. In the days that followed, I arranged for additional security at the hospital and began preparations for Vanessa and Lily's eventual relocation to Seattle. Benedict secured a property there, a comfortable house in a good neighborhood, with excellent schools nearby, and established the promised Seattle office of Winter Consortium. 2 weeks after Lily's birth, with mother and daughter both healthy and cleared for travel, I accompanied them to a private airfield where a chartered plane waited to take them to their new life. "I've accepted your job offer," Vanessa told me as we stood beside the plane. "I'll start when Lily is 3 months old." "No rush," I assured her. "Take the time you need with her." She nodded, then hesitated. "Maya, thank you for everything. Most women in your position would have. Most women haven't been through what we have," I interrupted gently. "Sometimes shared adversity creates stronger bonds than shared good fortune." Vanessa smiled, adjusting Lily in her arms. "A philosopher now, too? Running a financial empire and studying wisdom in your spare time?" I laughed, the sound surprising me with its genuineness. "Hardly. Just lessons learned the hard way." We said our goodbyes, and I watched as they boarded the plane that would take them to their fresh start. As the aircraft lifted into the WAR, clear blue sky, I felt a curious mixture of emotions: relief, hope, and something like closure. James was gone, but his legacy remained, transformed by the choices Vanessa and I had made in the aftermath of his deception. Where he had built a house of lies, we had salvaged what was valuable and discarded the rest. Where he had created division and betrayal, we had forged an unlikely alliance. 6 months later, Winter Consortium had completely reinvented itself. Our healthcare fund was outperforming market expectations. Our technology investments, including several directed by Vanessa, from the Seattle office, were showing promising early returns. And our reputation in the financial community had shifted from suspicious to respected. Viktor Petrov and his associates remained at a distance, our uneasy truce holding. Occasionally, I would notice someone watching me, or receive an indirect message suggesting that certain individuals were monitoring our progress. But no direct threats materialized, and as time passed, even these subtle reminders of our precarious situation became less frequent. On the anniversary of James's death, I visited his grave for the first time since the funeral. The headstone was simple: his name, the years of his life, nothing more. No beloved husband or dedicated father. No platitudes about his character or achievements. I placed a single white rose on the grave, not out of lingering affection, but as a symbol of the peace I had finally made with my past. "You underestimated me," I said softly to the silent stone. "You thought I was just an accessory, a shield for your empire, a conveniences to be replaced when something better came along." The wind rustled through the cemetery's trees, the only response to my words. "But you gave me something unintentional, James. You gave me strength I didn't know I had, purpose I might never have found. And for that, just that, I thank you." As I walked away, my phone buzzed with a message from Vanessa. It contained a photo of Lily, now sitting up and smiling widely at the camera, her copper hair growing into wispy curls, her eyes, James's eyes, bright with curiosity about the world. "She's thriving," the message read. "As are we both." I smiled, typing a quick response before slipping my phone back into my pocket and continuing toward my car. Behind me, James's legacy rested in cold ground, his secrets buried with him. Before me lay the future he never intended me to have, a future I had built from the ruins of his deception, stronger and more honest than anything he had created. And somewhere across the country, his daughter grew and flourished, protected by the unlikely alliance between his wife and his mistress, two women who had refused to be defined by his betrayal, who had forged something valuable from the wreckage he left behind. It wasn't the ending any of us had anticipated, but perhaps, in its own way, it was justice after all. 2 years after James's death, Winter Consortium had not only stabilized, but was thriving under my leadership. The Seattle office, headed by Vanessa, had become our fastest-growing division, specializing in technology investments and ethical financial innovations. Lily was a toddler now, taking her first steps and babbling her first words in a world far removed from the shadows of her father's legacy. I had settled into my role as CEO with a confidence that surprised even those who had initially supported me. The skepticism and condescension that had greeted my assumption of control had gradually given way to grudging respect, then genuine admiration. Business publications that had once questioned my qualifications now featured profiles highlighting the remarkable transformation of Winter Consortium under my leadership. From shadowy financial empire to transparent industry leader, one headline proclaimed, though of course none of these articles knew just how shadowy the empire had truly been. I still maintained the security measures we had implemented during those dangerous early months, though they had become more discreet over time. Viktor Petrov and his associates had gradually faded from our radar, finding other channels for their activities as we had hoped. Our insurance, the carefully preserved Evidence of their operations remained secure but untouched. On a crisp fall morning, as I reviewed quarterly projections in my office, Emma appeared with an envelope. "This was hand-delivered," she said, her expression concerned. "The courier wouldn't say who sent it." I opened it cautiously, half expecting another threatening photograph or message. Instead, I found an invitation to an exclusive economic forum in Zurich the following month. At the bottom, a handwritten note: "Your perspective would be valuable. VP, Viktor Petrov." After nearly 2 years of silence, a direct communication, I called Benedict immediately. "What do you make of this?" I asked after explaining the invitation. "It could be legitimate," he said cautiously. "Petrov does maintain a public persona as a respected international businessman. Economic forums are part of that image." "Or it could be a trap," I countered. "Get me isolated in a foreign country, away from our security infrastructure." "That too," he acknowledged. "Though killing or harming a prominent American CEO would create more problems than it would solve for someone like Petrov." I studied the invitation again. It seemed genuine. The forum was real, with recognized participants from global financial institutions. Attending would be a significant opportunity for Winter Consortium to establish itself in international circles. "I want a complete security assessment," I decided, "and contingency plans for every possible scenario. If I go, we leave nothing to chance." After extensive preparation and multiple security consultations, I found myself in Zurich 1 month. Later, accompanied by an expanded security team and Benedict, who had refused to let me attend alone. The forum was being held at a historic hotel overlooking Lake Zurich, with tight security and a carefully vetted guest list. I spotted Petrov immediately during the opening reception, commanding attention in the center of a group of European bankers, his silver-streaked hair and impeccable suit exactly as I remembered. He saw me too, excusing himself from his conversation, and approaching with the confident stride of a man accustomed to controlling every room he entered. "Mrs. Winters," he greeted me, extending his hand. "I'm pleased you accepted my invitation." I shook his hand briefly. "I was curious about your motives, Mr. Petrov." He smiled, the expression more genuine than I remembered from our last encounter. "Direct as always. Perhaps we could speak privately. The terrace is quite pleasant this time of evening." Benedict, hovering nearby, caught my eye with a concerned look. I gave him a subtle nod of reassurance. "The terrace would be fine," I agreed, "for a brief conversation." The terrace overlooked the illuminated city and dark waters of the lake, the evening air crisp but not uncomfortable. Security cameras monitored the area, and I knew both my team and the forum's security staff were keeping watch. Small comforts, but necessary ones. "You have accomplished quite a transformation," Petrov remarked, gesturing with his champagne glass toward the forum inside. "Winter Consortium is spoken of with respect in circles where it was once mentioned with skepticism." "That was the goal," I replied simply, "though I doubt you invited me to Switzerland to complement my business acumen." He laughed softly. "Perhaps I did. Contrary to what you might believe, Mrs. Winters, I respect what you've built. It takes courage to dismantle a profitable enterprise and rebuild it legitimately, especially when facing obstacles." "Obstacles like you?" I suggested. "Among others," he acknowledged. "You handled those obstacles with remarkable skill. No panic, no misguided attempts at retaliation. Just calm, strategic action." I studied him, trying to discern his true purpose. "Again, Mr. Petrov, flattery seems an insufficient reason for this meeting." He turned to face me directly. "I have a proposition for you. A legitimate one," he added, seeing my expression. "I am diversifying my own interests, moving toward more conventional enterprises." "Why? The other kind seemed quite profitable." "Profit isn't everything," he said, surprising me. Sustainability matters too. Security, legacy. He paused, looking out over the lake. I'm not a young man anymore, Mrs. Winters. I've built an empire of my own, but much of it exists in shadows. I find myself increasingly interested in creating something that can endure in the light. I couldn't help but laugh. And you want my advice on how to launder your reputation rather than just your money? His expression remained serious. I want a partnership. Winter Consortium has established itself in sectors I wish to enter legitimately. Healthcare, sustainable energy. You have the expertise and, more importantly, the credibility I need. You can't be serious, I said, though his expression suggested he was exactly that. After everything that happened in Boston, you expect me to enter a business relationship with you? Not based on trust, he clarified. Based on mutual interest, and with complete transparency. Any venture we undertake would be subject to the highest levels of compliance oversight, independent auditors, regulatory review, whatever assurances you require. I shook my head in disbelief. Why me? There are plenty of legitimate firms that don't know your history, that wouldn't demand such conditions. Because you've done what I'm trying to do, he said simply. You took an enterprise with complications and transformed it into something respectable, profitable, and sustainable. That expertise is valuable. The conversation was so surreal that I almost wondered if I was misunderstanding him. Viktor Petrov, the man who had threatened me, who had been one of James's most dangerous associates, was essentially asking me to help him go legitimate. I need time to consider this, I said finally. Of course, he nodded. The forum concludes on Friday. Perhaps we could speak again before then. As I turned to leave, he added, How is Ms. Drake? And the child? I froze, turning back to him slowly. That is not open for discussion. I mean no threat, he said, raising his hands slightly. Quite the opposite. I admire the arrangement you created, protecting your husband's child, employing the mother in a position that values her skills. It shows a capacity for seeing beyond conventional reactions. That's precisely why I'm approaching you now. I left without responding, unsettled by both his proposition and his mention of Vanessa and Lily. Back in my hotel suite, I briefed Benedict on the conversation. It could be genuine, he mused after hearing the details. Petrov is in his 60s. Men in his position often start thinking about legitimacy and legacy at that stage of life. Or it could be an elaborate scheme to gain access to Winter Consortium, to use our reputation to facilitate new operations, I countered. That too, he acknowledged. Though you'd hardly be likely to overlook something like that given your history. I spent a restless night considering Petrov's proposal. The idea was preposterous on its face, partnering with the very man who had been part of James's corrupt operations, who had threatened me when I began dismantling those connections. And yet, if Petrov was genuinely seeking to legitimize his business interests, rejecting him outright might push him back toward the shadows, toward the kind of operations that had made him dangerous in the first place. Engaging with him, cautiously, transparently, with every possible safeguard, might actually serve the greater good. I called Vanessa the next morning, wanting her perspective. We had developed a relationship of unusual honesty over the past 2 years, born of our shared experience navigating the aftermath of James's deception. He approached you directly? In Zurich? She sounded concerned, the background noise suggesting she was at the Seattle office. Yes, with what seems to be a legitimate business proposition. What's your instinct telling you? I considered the question carefully. That he's sincere about wanting legitimacy, but that doesn't make him trustworthy. The two aren't the same thing. No, they're not, she agreed. But if he's serious about operating above board, having someone like you involved might actually ensure that happens. Someone who knows what to watch for, who won't be fooled by creative accounting or regulatory evasion. You almost sound like you're suggesting I consider it, I said, surprised. I'm suggesting you explore it carefully, she clarified, with every possible protection in place, including maintaining our insurance policy. After further consultation with Benedict and Winter Consortium's security advisors, I agreed to a second meeting with Petrov. This time we met in a conference room at the forum venue, with Benedict present and recording devices openly placed on the table between us. I appreciate your thorough approach to security, Mrs. Winters, Petrov remarked, eyeing the recording equipment without apparent concern. It's not personal, Mr. Petrov. It's good business practice, I replied. Now, let's discuss the specifics of what you're proposing. Over the next 2 hours, Petrov outlined his vision, a joint venture focused on healthcare infrastructure in Eastern Europe, with Winter Consortium providing expertise and reputation, and Petrov contributing capital and regional connections. He presented market analyses, regulatory considerations, and projected financials, all of which were impressively thorough. All funds would come from my legitimate holdings, he emphasized, subject to complete forensic accounting review before entering the venture. All regional partners would undergo enhanced due diligence, and the entire operation would maintain transparency exceeding regulatory requirements. Why healthcare specifically? I asked, still searching for hidden motives. An aging population in the region creates significant demand, he explained. And unlike some industries, healthcare offers the opportunity to create something unquestionably beneficial: hospitals, clinics, care facilities, infrastructure that improves lives while generating sustainable returns. It was a compelling vision, I had to admit, and the markets he was describing were indeed underserved, with genuine need for the kind of development he was proposing. If, and this remains a significant if, we were to consider some form of limited partnership, I said carefully, it would require extraordinary measures to ensure compliance and transparency, including measures that might seem intrusive or excessive by normal business standards. Petrov nodded. I anticipate no less. In fact, I would insist on such measures myself. The value of this venture to me is not just financial return, but the establishment of a verifiably legitimate operation. Benedict and I exchanged glances. His skeptical expression had gradually shifted to cautious interest as the presentation progressed. We'll need to conduct our own market analysis and background research, I informed Petrov. This isn't a decision I can make here in Zurich. Of course, he agreed readily. Take whatever time you need. The opportunity will remain open. Back in Boston, I assembled a specialized team to evaluate Petrov's proposal. Financial analysts, compliance experts, security consultants, and regional specialists with knowledge of Eastern European healthcare markets. Their task was to examine the proposition from every angle, identifying potential risks, hidden agendas, and legitimate opportunities. Simultaneously, I had another team conducting enhanced due diligence on Petrov himself, his known associates, and his legitimate business holdings. This investigation went far beyond standard background checks, drawing on specialized resources to create the most complete picture possible of the man and his operations. 6 weeks later, the findings were presented in a comprehensive report. The market opportunity was genuine. The need for healthcare infrastructure in the regions Petrov had identified was significant and growing. His legitimate holdings were substantial enough to fund the venture without questionable sources. And most surprisingly, he appeared to be gradually unwinding connections to his more shadowy activities, a process that had begun even before his approach to me in Zurich. It seems he may be sincere, concluded Dr. Eleanor Harris, the former World Bank executive who had led the evaluation team. Though sincerity doesn't eliminate risk, of course. I turned to our head of security, a former intelligence operative named Michael Chen. Your assessment? Petrov is making a significant transition, Chen confirmed. Our sources indicate He's been extracting himself from certain associations for approximately 18 months. Not without friction, but with apparent determination. Recommendations? I asked, looking around the table at the assembled experts. Proceed with extreme caution, Harris suggested. A pilot project, perhaps, limited in scope and heavily monitored, with clear benchmarks for compliance and transparency. And multiple exit strategies, added Chen, with triggers defined in advance for terminating the relationship if certain red lines are crossed. I considered their input, along with the detailed reports before me. The opportunity was compelling from a business perspective. The potential positive impact on underserved communities was significant, and the ability to influence Petrov toward legitimate operations could have far-reaching benefits beyond this specific venture. But the risks were equally substantial. Petrov's history, the potential for hidden agendas, the reputational risk, to Winter Consortium if anything went wrong, all were serious considerations. I scheduled a video conference with Vanessa, sharing the findings and seeking her perspective before making a final decision. The data supports his claims, she acknowledged. After reviewing the reports, and the structure you're considering has significant safeguards. But, I prompted, hearing the reservation in her voice. But people like Petrov have built careers on appearing to be one thing while being another, she said. The most successful predators are the ones who can convince their prey they're harmless. You think it's a trap? She considered this. Not necessarily a trap, but I think his motivations may be more complex than simply wanting to go legitimate. There's always an angle with men like him. What would you do? I asked directly. I'd proceed, she said after a moment's consideration, but I'd maintain absolute vigilance, and I'd make sure our insurance policy remains intact and updated. The next day, I contacted Petrov with our decision. Winter Consortium would enter, a limited joint venture, focused on a single pilot project, a modern medical complex in a mid-sized city in Romania. The agreement would include unprecedented levels of compliance oversight, including independent auditors with unrestricted access, regulatory coordination, beyond required minimums, and clear benchmarks for performance and governance. You drive a hard bargain, Mrs. Winters, Petrov remarked during our video conference, though he seemed more amused than offended by the stringent conditions. These aren't negotiating points, Mr. Petrov. They're prerequisites. I understand. He nodded. And I accept them fully. When can we begin? The Romania Medical Center project launched 3 months later, with groundbreaking attended by local officials, healthcare professionals, and a small delegation from both Winter Consortium and Petrov's legitimate holding company. I attended personally, as did Petrov, our first meeting since Zurich. A new beginning, he remarked as we stood watching the ceremonial first shovel break ground, for this community and perhaps for our enterprises as well. If all goes according to plan, I replied cautiously. It will, he assured me. I have too much invested in this success, and I don't mean merely financial capital. Over the following 18 months, the Romania project progressed with remarkable smoothness. Construction met or exceeded benchmarks, financial governance remained impeccable, and compliance reviews found nothing concerning. Petrov's behavior as a partner was surprisingly straightforward, professional, transparent, and focused on legitimate business objectives. Gradually, cautiously, we expanded the joint venture to include 2 additional projects in neighboring countries, each with the same rigorous oversight and clearly defined parameters. Each successful completion built a track record that began to suggest Petrov's transformation might be genuine. During this period, I maintained regular contact with Vanessa, who continued to oversee our Seattle operations while raising Lily, now 4 years old and thriving. Her perspective remained valuable, balanced between skepticism and recognition of the positive outcomes our venture with Petrov was achieving. The healthcare facilities are making a genuine difference, she acknowledged during one of our weekly calls. Whatever his original motives, the results are benefiting thousands of people who previously lacked access to modern medical care. That's what matters, ultimately, I agreed, though I still sleep better knowing we maintain comprehensive oversight. 3 years after our initial meeting in Zurich, Petrov requested a private conversation during my visit to our latest project in Budapest. We met in a secure conference room at our project headquarters, with my security team nearby, but not present, for the discussion. "I wish to thank you, Mrs. Winters," he began, seeming uncharacteristically reflective. "Our partnership has exceeded my expectations, both in financial returns and in less tangible benefits. It's been surprisingly successful," I acknowledged cautiously, "though I'm not sure what I've done to earn particular thanks." "You took a risk," he said simply, "when most in your position would have refused outright. You saw potential where others would have seen only threat." I studied him, still searching for hidden motives even after years of seemingly straightforward dealings. "It was a calculated business decision, Mr. Petrov. Nothing more." He smiled slightly. "We both know that's not entirely true, but your modesty is commendable." He paused, then continued, "I have a personal matter to discuss with you, something unrelated to our business ventures." I tensed slightly. "Go on. I am aware that you maintain certain information regarding my previous activities and associations. Insurance, as you might call it." My expression remained neutral, though internally I was immediately on alert. This was the first time in our 3-year association that he had directly referenced our insurance policy. "That information remains secure," I said carefully, "and untouched, as our relationship has given me no reason to consider using it." "I appreciate that," he nodded. "And I am not asking you to destroy it or return it. Such a request would be unreasonable and would undermine the trust we have built." "Then what is it you want to discuss?" He leaned forward slightly. "I am considering a more complete transition. Breaking remaining ties with certain associates who continue to operate in ways I no longer wish to be connected with." I raised an eyebrow, surprised by this revelation. "That sounds potentially dangerous, given the nature of those associates." "Indeed," he acknowledged, "which is why I am preparing extensive protective measures, including the strategic disclosure of certain information to appropriate authorities. Information that would make any action against me more costly than beneficial for these individuals." I began to understand where this was going. "And you're telling me this because your insurance policy might suddenly become more valuable or more dangerous, depending on what is revealed and to whom," he explained. "I wanted to give you advance notice so you could take whatever precautions you deem necessary." The implications were significant. If Petrov was indeed planning to expose elements of his former network to authorities, the information we held could become evidence in potential prosecutions, or a target for those seeking to prevent such exposure. "When?" I asked simply. "Within the next 6 months," he replied. "The preparations are complex and must be coordinated precisely." I nodded slowly. "Thank you for the warning. I'll make appropriate arrangements." As I left the meeting, I felt an odd sense of history repeating itself. Once again, I was working to protect information related to James's corrupt dealings, preparing for potential repercussions from dangerous people. But this time, the circumstances were fundamentally different. I was acting from a position of strength and knowledge, not the vulnerability of unexpected discovery. Back in Boston, I convened a meeting with Benedict and our security team, sharing Petrov's revelation and discussing our response. We implemented enhanced protection for our secured data, updated contingency plans, and subtly increased security for key personnel, including Vanessa and Lily in Seattle, though I chose not to alarm them with the specific details. 5 months later, the news broke. A coordinated international law enforcement operation had resulted in the arrest of several prominent figures in Eastern European organized crime and financial fraud. Viktor Petrov was mentioned not as a target, but as a cooperating witness who had provided crucial evidence. As the details emerged in subsequent weeks, it became clear that Petrov had indeed made a complete break with his past, offering authorities a comprehensive map of operations he had once been part of in exchange for immunity and protected witness status. The joint ventures we had established remained intact, now overseen by a trust structure Petrov had created in anticipation of his cooperation with authorities. Our projects continued to operate successfully, providing healthcare services to communities that desperately needed them while generating sustainable returns for investors. Petrov himself disappeared from public view, presumably into some form of witness protection program. The last communication I received from him was a handwritten note delivered through secure channels. The transformation is complete. Thank you for your part in making it possible. VP. Our insurance policy. The information James had collected, and we had preserved, was never needed as leverage against Petrov. Instead, copies of relevant portions were provided to authorities as supporting evidence, while the originals remained secure, a relic of a chapter in my life that seemed increasingly distant. 5 years after James's death, Winter Consortium had evolved into something entirely different from the empire he had built. Legitimate, transparent, and focused on investments that generated both financial returns and positive social impact. The Romania model had expanded to other regions, creating a healthcare division that had become our fastest-growing segment. Vanessa continued to lead our technology investments from Seattle, where Lily was now in elementary school, a bright, curious child who knew me as Aunt Maya, a family friend who visited regularly. The complexity of our connection remained a secret we would someday have to address, but for now, it seemed wiser to allow Lily a childhood uncomplicated by her father's legacy. On a spring morning, I stood on the observation deck of our newest medical facility in Prague, watching as patients entered the building below. Each person represented a life potentially improved by access to care they previously couldn't obtain. A tangible, positive outcome from a journey that had begun with betrayal and deception. My phone buzzed with a message from Vanessa. A photo of Lily at her school science fair, proudly displaying a project on renewable energy. Takes after her aunt, the caption read, a private joke referencing Winter Consortium's growing investments in that sector. I smiled, sending back a quick message of congratulations before turning my attention back to the scene below. The path from James's death to this moment had been neither direct nor easy. It had required courage, determination, and a willingness to form unlikely alliances with his mistress, with a former criminal, with my own capacity for leadership I hadn't known I possessed. James had intended me to be merely a shield for his activities, a convenient legal owner with no real understanding or control. Instead, I had become something he never anticipated, a force for transformation, turning his corruption into creation, his deception into something honest and enduring. As I left the observation deck to attend a meeting with local healthcare officials, I thought about the message I would someday share with Lily when she was old enough to understand her complicated heritage. That we are not defined by the deceptions practiced upon us, but by how we respond to them. That from betrayal can come strength, from loss can come purpose, and from endings can come the most unexpected new beginnings. It wasn't the ending any of us had anticipated, but perhaps in its own way, it was justice after all. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.